time, and when at the expiration of his praetorship he went to Spain, he took him away in his litter, in the midst of his lictors bearing the fasces, and others who had come to attend and take leave of him. He always treated his friends with such kindness and good nature, that when Gaius Oppius, in travelling with him through a forest, was suddenly taken ill, he resigned to him the only place there was to shelter them at night, and lay upon the ground in the open air. When he had placed himself at the head of affairs, he advanced some of his faithful adherents, though of mean extraction, to the highest offices; and when he was censured for this partiality, he openly said, "Had I been assisted by robbers and cutthroats in the defence of my honour, I should have made them the same recompense." The resentment he entertained against any one was never so implacable that he did not very willingly renounce it when opportunity offered. Although Gaius Memmius had published some extremely virulent speeches against him, and he had answered him with equal acrimony, yet he afterwards assisted him with his vote and interest when he stood candidate for the consulship. When Gaius Calvus, after publishing some scandalous epigrams upon him, endeavoured to effect a reconciliation by the intercession of friends, he wrote to him of his own accord the first letter. And when Valerius Catullus, who had, as he himself observed, fixed such a stain upon his character in his verses upon Mamurra as never could be obliterated, begged his pardon, he invited him to supper the same day, and continued to take up his lodging with his father occasionally, as he had been accustomed to do. His temper was also naturally averse to severity in retaliation. After he had captured the pirates by whom he had been taken, having sworn that he would crucify them, he did so indeed, but he first ordered their throats to be cut. He could never bear the thought of doing any harm to Cornelius Fagitas, who had dogged him in the night when he was sick and a fugitive, with the design of carrying him to Sylla, and from whose hands he had escaped with some difficulty by giving him a bribe. Philemon, his amanuensis, who had promised his enemies to poison him, he put to death without torture. When he was summoned as a witness against Publius Clodius, his wife Pompia's gallant, who was prosecuted for the profanation of religious ceremonies, he declared he knew nothing of the affair, although his mother Aurelia and his sister Julia gave the court an exact and full account of the circumstances. And being asked why then he had divorced his wife, "Because," he said, "my family should not only be free from guilt, but even from the suspicion of it." Both in his administration and his conduct towards the vanquished party in the civil war, he showed a wonderful moderation and clemency. For while Pompey declared that he would consider those as enemies who did not take arms in defence of the republic, he desired it to be understood that he should regard those who remained neuter as his friends. With regard to all those to whom he had, on Pompey's recommendation, given any command in the army, he left them at perfect liberty to go over to him if they pleased. When some proposals were made at Illyria for a surrender, which gave rise to a free communication between the two camps, and Afranius and Petreius, upon a sudden change of resolution, had put to the sword all Caesar's men who were found in the camp, he scorned to imitate the base treachery which they had practised against himself. On the field of Pharsalia he called out to the soldiers to spare their fellow citizens, and afterwards gave permission to every man in his army to save an enemy. None of them, so far as appears, lost their lives but in battle, excepting only Afranius, Faustus, and young Lucius Caesar, and it is thought that even they were put to death without his consent. Afranius and Faustus had borne arms against him after obtaining their pardon, and Lucius Caesar had not only in the most cruel manner destroyed with fire and sword his freedmen and slaves, but cut to pieces the wild beasts which he had prepared for the entertainment of the people. And finally, a little before his death, he permitted all whom he had not before pardoned to return into Italy and to bear offices both civil and military. He even replaced the statues of Sylla and Pompey, which had been thrown down by the populace. And after this, whatever was devised or uttered, he chose rather to check than to punish it. Accordingly, having detected certain conspiracies and nocturnal assemblies, he went no farther than to intimate by a proclamation that he knew of them. And as to those who indulged themselves in the liberty of reflecting severely upon him, he only warned them in a public speech not to persist in their offence. He bore with great moderation a virulent libel written against him by Aulus Caecinna, and the abusive lampoons of Pittholeus, most highly reflecting on his reputation. His other words and actions, however, so far outweigh all his good qualities, that it is thought he abused his power, and was justly cut off. For he not only obtained excessive honours, such as the consulship every year, the dictatorship for life, and the censorship, but also the title of emperor, and the surname of Father of his country, besides having his statue amongst the kings, and a lofty couch in the theatre. He even suffered some honours to be decreed to him which were unbefitting the most exalted of mankind, such as a gilded chair of state in the Senate house and on his tribunal, a consecrated chariot, and banners in the Circensian procession, temples, altars, statues among the gods, a bed of state in the temples, a priest, and a college of priests dedicated to himself like those of Pan, and that one of the months should be called by his name. There were indeed no honours which he did not either assume himself or grant to others at his will and pleasure. In his third and fourth consulship he used only the title of the office, being content with the power of dictator, which was conferred upon him with the consulship. And in both years he substituted other consuls in his room during the 3 last months, so that in the intervals he held no assemblies of the people for the election of magistrates, excepting only tribunes and aediles of the people, and appointed officers under the name of prefects, instead of the praetors, to administer the affairs of the city during his absence. The office of consul having become vacant by the sudden death of one of the consuls the day before the calends of January, the 1st of January, he conferred it on a person who requested it of him for a few hours. Assuming the same license, and regardless of the customs of his country, he appointed magistrates to hold their offices for terms of years. He granted the insignia of the consular dignity to 10 persons of praetorian rank. He admitted into the Senate some men who had been made free of the city, and even natives of Gaul who were semi-barbarians. He likewise appointed to the management of the mint and the public revenue of the state some servants of his own household, and entrusted the command of 3 legions, which he left at Alexandria, to an old catamite of his, the son of his freedman Rufinus. He was guilty of the same extravagance in the language he publicly used, as Titus Ampius informs us, according to whom he said, "The Republic is nothing but a name, without substance or reality." Sylla was an ignorant fellow to abdicate the dictatorship. Men ought to